Next slide. So this is kind of an overview of what progressive engagement looks like for families in Cleveland. And so as you can see, all of our families get referred to rapid rehousing, which is a 4-month rental subsidy and security deposit attached with case management. And since August 2014, we processed 400 families in rapid rehousing. So some of those families, as you can see, no additional assistance is required. If you look at the left arrow, you know, those families, they get that assistance and they're fine and they're stably housed and they don't return to homelessness. If you go down the middle arrow, you can see some families need more assistance. And what we call that is the Zacchaeus housing. That is 6 months of additional rental assistance and intensive case management. The case management model that is used for these families is the critical time intervention model, which is another evidence-based practice of case management. And out of those 400 families that were processed, about 25 to 30% of the rapid rehousing families get referred to this second or this additional level of assistance. And then from there, some of those families are fine, right? They get a little bit of extra assistance and they are fine and there's no additional sort of, you know, housing assistance required and they're successfully housed. If you continue going down the last arrow in the middle, some of the Zacchaeus families still need an additional level of assistance, and this is the third tier of assistance, and that is a permanent voucher. About 50 to 60% of the families that are in the Zacchaeus housing actually get bridged to a shelter plus care voucher in our community. And you know, one of the reasons for that is because, you know, as the need is higher, obviously their housing barriers are significantly high if they're going to need a voucher. And so people that we put in Zacchaeus, oftentimes we know that they have, you know, substantial mental health or, you know, drug or alcohol issues, or, you know, that they just need that additional level of assistance. And so we put them in Zacchaeus ultimately to bridge them to a permanent voucher. Recently, what we also started is bridging people from that Zacchaeus, so that second level, so that second tier, to public housing. So we've partnered with our local public housing agency, and some of the families that are not mentally ill but really need that third tier of assistance, so these are young families or families who really don't, you know, haven't had a lot of sort of independent living skills, things like that, they're actually going to get bridged to public housing. And we just started that this year, and we're anticipating that about 50 to 60 households will be bridged to our public housing agency in 2016. The only other thing I want to mention is that sometimes families, you know, we do have turnaround, and so families that are not successfully housed will come back through our doors. If a family has already been through rapid rehousing once or twice, obviously we're going to try a different housing plan. And so that third arrow kind of on the right side, some families that we know that have a, you know, persistent or severe mental health diagnosis, and we know that they're not going to be able to sustain, we have in few cases bridged them directly to that voucher because we know that, you know, that's exactly what they need. Next slide. So I'm really not going to get into rapid rehousing. I'm going to let Ann and Jen do that. This is just an overview of exactly what it looks like, which I've kind of already talked about, and Ann and Jen are both going to go into it more. So I'm not gonna really talk about that. Next slide. And on this slide, I just kind of we talked a little bit about Zacchaeus, and we talked a little bit about what that eat-in voucher is, and I just kind of want to pay attention to our other housing options on the bottom. Thank you. And so on the family side, we only have one transitional program for families, and that's at Laura's Home, which is basically a one-year program where families can stay and sort of work on, you know, employment options and things like that. So, so sometimes we refer families to that because we think that would be a better fit than sort of going through rapid rehousing and sort of progressive engagement. Maggie's Place is it's another transitional program that takes in pregnant young women. And so sometimes if we have a pregnant female, we will refer her to that. And then there's HM Life, which is another transitional program in one of our suburbs that focuses on employment, and I believe that's a 2-year program. And then again, we obviously are always recommending that our families sign up for our public housing because we think that's really important, and that's an affordable option for a lot of our families, which are low income. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Jen, and she's going to talk more in-depthly about our rapid rehousing program.
Yes, thank you. My name is Jen Slider. I'm going to give kind of an overview of our rapid rehousing program in our agency. Eden is a nonprofit housing organization, so our role here is administering ESG, and we also administer the permanent vouchers that some of our families end up accessing, and we also employ the housing locators for rapid rehousing. So the process of a family accessing rapid rehousing begins with families not being able to be diverted. So if they're unable to be diverted from CMC, they're going to enter one of our 7 local family shelters. At that point, the shelter case manager is going to refer those families to Eden for rapid rehousing. So pretty much every family is referred directly to Eden for this 4 months of assistance. At that point, we determine if the family is eligible for the assistance, and we assign them to one of our 2 housing locators. The housing locators then meet with the family, fill out a small application, and kind of just discuss what they're looking for housing. What barriers they may have, such as past evictions or a criminal history, and if they have any balances on their utilities that may limit where they're able to reside. So once they get that information, they can start sending the family some housing leads. So they'll send leads to the family as well as their shelter case manager, so everyone is kind of aware of what the available properties are that might match this family's needs. And all of those leads are documented, so later on we can go back and make sure that we're not duplicating our leads that are assigned, and keep track of how many leads each family has gotten. We also have weekly meetings between the housing locators and our shelter case managers. So everyone gets together once a week, and we go through every single client and talk about where they're at in the housing location process, and at that point kind of discuss any updates that haven't been communicated. Once a unit is located, our housing locators will inspect the units. All of our housing locators are HQS certified. That's Housing Quality Standards. So they go through a training, so they know what to look for when inspecting a unit. So we know that our families are moving into units that are safe for them. Once the unit passes inspection and the family moves in, the client's assigned to a rapid rehousing case manager, and they'll work for them for the following 4 months. And our rapid rehousing case managers are employed by a separate partner agency. Those staff are not employed by Eden. Next slide, please. So in order for our housing locators to have leads to refer our families to, we have to develop some strong relationships with the landlords in our community. So one way that we do that is our landlord forums. So we have monthly landlord forums where we invite landlords to come to our offices, and we have a PowerPoint slideshow and kind of go over the paperwork that's required for the landlord to receive a subsidy and what the time frames are for us processing, inspecting, determining the rent, so they understand exactly what the process is and what they can expect. We ask new landlords that may not be familiar with us to attend those forums, so they have a name and a face that they can recognize if they have questions in the future. They know of a point person that they can reach out to. We also use a lot of referrals from our current landlords. So when we're out doing inspections, we'll ask landlords if they know of anyone else who has available property that we might not be aware of that might be willing to use our subsidy program. So in that way, we garner a lot of new referrals through our landlords that we currently have and accessing their networks. We also have existing landlord base from our permanent program. So like I said before, we administer permanent rental subsidy programs, and we have over 2,000 landlords that we've worked with currently or in the past that we can reach out to. And if they've already worked with us for a permanent program, sometimes they're more likely to accept a rapid rehousing client who just has temporary assistance because they already are aware of our process, and that we make the on-time payments, which is really important to our landlords, is making sure that they get that money on the first of the month every month, and is one of the advantages of having a subsidy client in their properties. And we also try and explain the advantages to our landlords of renting to a subsidy client. So really pushing that case management, that each of our families is going to have someone that's working with the family regularly, coming out to their unit. That can really help entice the landlord to rent to one of our clients if they know that they're going to have that follow-up. We also talk to them about helping a family and helping our community by housing these families, and sometimes we can recruit landlords through that avenue. And we also explain to them our goal of having no eviction. So just really explaining to them that our goal here is to house someone permanently and make sure that they are living in that unit throughout at least their total lease. Next slide. So we use this progressive engagement model for all of our families that are entering shelter. So many of our families have some significant barriers, as I'm sure many other agencies out there have as well. So I'm not going to go through each of these, but just want to kind of highlight that we have a lot of families with some serious barriers, some really large families. We've served families in the past with up to 9 children. We have families that have vast utility balances that can't get into certain units because they only have certain utility companies at that unit. We do house clients with 0 income, so we will work with someone who comes into shelter with no income to start with. Also, something that we've been coming up against more recently is language barriers. So we have families coming in that may speak only Spanish. So trying to communicate to them the housing leads and what the process of the subsidy is can be challenging. But ultimately, we try and house them with a Spanish-speaking landlord so they can communicate with each other properly. Next slide. So some of the strategies that we use to overcome these barriers are, number one, just knowing our landlord pool. So knowing the landlords that have units available and knowing who they'll accept and who they will not. Recognizing who's going to do a criminal background check, who's going to check for credit, and then if we know someone has a felony in their background, not even referring those families to the landlord. We don't want to waste any time. We want to make this process as quick and as smooth as possible. So knowing a lot about your landlords and who they're willing to accept and who they're not willing to accept is really important in this process. We also use other resources in our community, such as PRC and the Furniture Bank. So PRC we use at times to pay back balances on utility bills. So if someone has a large balance on their electric bill, but they have to pay electric in their new unit, we'll access PRC funds at times to help with that. And then we have a local furniture bank that we access furniture for our families from. Our shelter milestones are something that we've implemented last year, and those are just objectives for our shelter case managers to complete with a family while they're in shelter to get them ready for housing. So this has really created a lot of consistency across the board in our shelters, and it's really allowing the families to get ready for housing while they're still in shelter. And Anne's going to go over those milestones in the next slide. And the final strategy that we use is case management milestones. So those are objectives for our rapid rehousing case managers to complete with a family while they're in their first 4 months of rapid rehousing. And that's to help them gain self-sufficiency before their assistance ends. And Ann is also going to go over those as well. Next slide.
Hi, I'm Ann. Excuse me. Hi, I'm Ann Denstead with Eden. I supervise the rapid rehousing program in the housing locator. So working collaboratively is a necessary part of our progressive engagement model. To help facilitate the collaboration, the milestones were developed at both the shelter and the housing levels. The milestones help to focus services provided to families towards locating, securing, and maintaining housing. It helps to reinforce the housing first approach and has standardized services among the different shelters in our continuum and our partner rapid rehousing case management providers. So let's talk a little bit about the partnership at the shelter level. The ultimate goal of the shelter milestones is to assist and prepare the families to rapidly exit shelter by working to address barriers in preparation for maintaining permanent housing. So the shelters will refer families to rapid rehousing within 7 days of their admission to the shelter. During the time that the families are searching for housing, the shelter case managers are assisting the families with addressing their needs and barriers. So those include income efforts, income and employment efforts, such as linking them to local employment assistance programs, applying for county cash benefits, or disability benefits such as SSI or SSDI. Along with that, they help to coordinate with the housing locator, which includes assistance with facilitating appointments, following up with the families regarding what housing needs to make sure, did you call the landlord, did you go see the unit, things such as that. In preparation for housing, the shelter case managers also help to determine the status of utility. So if there's a past due balance, they're providing info regarding utility assistance and resources. In addition, they discuss with the families if they have all their requiring documents for each household member, because oftentimes that's needed with rental applications, but also with utility assistance. And then they'll work to refer them on for or give them resources to obtain those missing documents. They also assist with developing a plan for furniture. So this may include the shelter agency's resources, or referral to our local furniture bank, applying for PRC, or if there's an open case with the Department of Child and Family Services, coordinating assistance with beds or other household needs with their assigned caseworker. So in addition, the shelter case managers communicate and coordinate any shelter discharges with central intake. They also attend the weekly meeting with the housing locators as well, so where they discuss families' progress towards locating housing and assist with the coordination of families moving out of shelter. So we've moved to kind of a 72-hour turnaround time. So to help expedite families move to housing and efficiently manage our shelter openings, the shelter staff work to ensure the families move out of shelter within 48 hours of their unit passing inspection. They then clean and prepare the open shelter space within 24 hours, thus allowing for a new family to admit to shelter within 72 hours of the previous family's unit passing inspection. This has helped to better kind of manage our use of overflow shelter space in our continuum. Next slide. So an essential part of the partnership at the shelter level is the collaboration of services among providers regarding non-compliant and challenging families. So some of the issues that we often encounter with families are a failure to locate housing by their 30-day deadline, families that struggle to comply with shelter expectations or who cannot function in the shelter environment, or negative shelter discharges. So to help address these issues, the shelter staff, rapid rehousing staff, and central intake staff will collaborate and schedule a mediation in which they'll develop a behavioral contractor plan to avoid clients being discharged before locating, securing permanent housing. The mediations and developed contracts or plans help to reinforce not only the families but also the providers, and has proven to be a successful way in which we can motivate all of us who are involved so that the family locates and secures permanent housing. Next slide. So once the families have located housing and their unit is passed an HQS inspection, the families will move into housing and begin working with an assigned rapid housing case manager. Again, the milestones help to standardize services and focus rapid housing case management providers and the families towards maintaining permanent housing. The families and the rapid housing case managers are required to meet at least one time per week. During these meetings, they complete housing stability plans and reviews and work towards goals for maintaining permanent housing. The rapid rehousing case managers will submit case management documentation, which documents the ongoing case management services, their progress with goals, and allows for rental assistance payments to be sent on their behalf, on behalf of the clients to their landlords. So at the initial appointment with the families, the rapid rehousing case manager they'll review the lease, provide education regarding landlord and tenant rights and responsibilities. The rapid housing case manager is also available during those 4 months that they are working with families to address any tenancy issues that may arise with the family and the landlord. So the rapid housing case managers resume the work that was progressing in shelter. So they will link the families to child care assistance if that's not already in place. They'll continue and with the employment search or income efforts such as, providing leads, resume development and education, and additional community employment assistance resources. As support is important to enable a family to maintain housing, rapid housing case managers will link the family to community support resources, and these include such as mental health treatment, case management, neighborhood collaboratives, local food pantries, and other community case management support. Since we strive for the goal of no evictions, rapid housing case managers are working to develop an eviction prevention plan with families. This may include discussing how to pay rent, when to pay rent, providing money management education, and assist with the development of a budget and savings plan. For families with high needs and barriers, they may refer for additional assistance and more intensive case management services. Or they may develop another plan for housing, such as applying for subsidized housing, discuss residing with family members or friends, dependent on their circumstances. So to continue to ensure collaboration, the rapid housing case managers meet twice per month. During the meeting, we discuss each family and their progress towards milestones in maintaining housing. We also discuss challenging families, which helps facilitate a conversation to problem solve. Next slide. So during the time the families are working with their rapid housing case manager, they are continually assessed on their ability to maintain housing. With the progressive engagement model, all families are going through rapid housing first. So towards the end of their third and fourth, maybe beginning of their fourth month, the rapid housing case managers have a pretty good idea as to whether the family will be able to maintain housing. There's now the option of referring on for additional assistance, additional rental assistance, more intensive case management services for those families that have been identified as having really, high barriers for high needs. So the Zacchaeus Housing Solutions Program will provide this family with an additional 6 months of rental assistance along with intensive supportive case management. So when we're trying to determine which families are in need of assistance, there's several factors that are taken into account. We discussed, were there previously failed rapid housing enrollments? Are they chronically homeless? The current barriers of the family and what the updated housing barrier score is. What the family's ability is to pay rent. Do they have income, no income, pending, cash or income benefits such as SSI or SSDI? And discuss the long-term needs of the family. Will the family possibly only need additional temporary assistance, or is this a family that may need permanent assistance, such as a permanent housing voucher for families with significant mental health and or ARD? Or for families with low income, minimal ability to increase their income, such as somebody who just has, a set income of SSI or SSDI, are they, possibly somebody who eventually may need to go through and apply for subsidized housing with CMHA. So it's also important to determine how compliant the family has been with case management and progress towards milestones. So if they, really weren't engaged with their case manager or didn't really follow up, this is also taken into account. And finally, it's also the timeline as to when they would need to transition to an additional assistance program. So when is their fourth month of assistance, and are there openings for that? Do we need to try to maybe possibly extend for a fifth month, which we've done in more extreme cases? Next slide, please. So the old process versus the new. So how have things changed with the progressive engagement model? So previously, rapid rehousing was initially a security deposit and 2 months of rental assistance. If needed, the family could receive extensions up to 6 months. But after 6 months, the family was responsible to pay rent. There was not an option to bridge to another program for additional assistance. So we assessed for longer term, or permanent assistance for families at the shelter level, which also included looking at how many times the family returned to shelter. So the new process with the progressive engagement model, all families initially are going through rapid rehousing, and they're continually assessed on their needs, barriers, and their ability to maintain housing. This helps to screen which families are the higher needs and which need additional assistance. Also, the program focuses on a no eviction policy, ultimately striving to keep families in housing and reducing the number of families that return to shelter. So, and as we know, not every family is unique, so the continual assessment and the option to allow families to bridge or change programs allows families to remain in housing and receive additional services that they need. Next slide. So you may be asking, all this sounds great, but has the progressive engagement model been successful? And yes, so far we've seen positive outcomes since implementing progressive engagement. We've reduced the time frame from enrollment to when the family is housed. It was previously 60 days. It is now on an average of 42. Also, we've seen a reduction in the number of families that have returned to shelter. It was previously 23%. It is now down to 17%. So when looking at families that have bridged and received additional assistance, of the families that bridged to the Zacchaeus Housing Solutions program, only one of those families has returned to shelter. And of the families that bridged to a permanent voucher, 0 families have returned to shelter. So the continuum has improved to manage shelter space and reduce the use of shelter overflow with the 72-hour turnaround of families moving out and new families moving in. And the progressive model with the milestones has helped to standardize the services the families receive both in shelter and in housing, and has improved the collaboration amongst the different providers in our continuum of care.